afternoon, and also for recording our weekly worship and messages. Yeah, I think it's a great blessing that what Kuya Ray is doing is he would record our worship singing and the message, and he will upload it in our Facebook page so that even those who are not here so will be able to listen to the songs and the message that we hear every Sunday. So, and also I appreciate what Kuya Ray also is doing is, it's sometimes when I get home and I saw that, it's uploaded. So I'm also one of the people who are excited to, see. Not because I'm excited to see myself, but I just want to, improve how I deliver the message. So I like, hearing feedbacks and everything. And sometimes, congregations, or people, church members, you tend to be, hesitant on giving comments to your pastor because you're afraid that your pastor might get offended and things like that. So, yeah, but don't worry, I don't get offended, right? So I'm already used to criticism from my wife. So, I'm kind of I'm already used to it. So I mean, if you would like to share some insight, Pastor, maybe you can. When I started here, some people said that, but Pastor lacks eye contact with people. Well, I've been hearing that since, because, I tend to, avoid eye contact most of the time because, I don't want you to think that I'm speaking about you because most of the time it's true, right? So, anyway, so there's this person, one Sunday, and his mother was trying to wake him up for the worship service, right? So when his mother knocked on his door, he said to his mom, "I'm not going." "Why not?" asked his mother. So this guy said, "I'll give you 2 reasons. 1, I don't like them, and 2, they don't like me." Okay? So and then his mother replied, "Well, I give you 2 reasons as well. 1, you're already 47 years old. And 2, you are the pastor." So, anyway, so our topic for this afternoon is about, the Good Shepherd. Jesus the Good Shepherd. The term pastor, it's somewhat similar to, the term pastol in Tagalog, or in Spanish, I think that's also their term that they use for shepherd, right? Pastol, pastor, so, yeah. So, today, the reading or the gospel reading for this Sunday is about Jesus as the Good Shepherd, and John chapter 10, verse 11 to 18. So if you will open our Bibles in John chapter 10, verse 11, it says, "I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the Good Shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." Why did Jesus call himself the Good Shepherd? In this passage, at least twice, he mentioned that phrase, "I am the Good Shepherd." Right? And it's interesting, when Jesus said that I am the Good Shepherd, the implication is that there is a bad shepherd. And if there's a good, there's a bad. Right? And apparently, in this passage, the bad shepherds are the hired ones, the hired caretakers of the sheep. So who are these hired caretakers that Jesus was talking about? Are they the thieves and the robbers that he mentions in chapter 10, verse 8 to 10? It says there, "All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Now, it seems like there's this contrast that Jesus is doing, right? Through John, the writer of this gospel, is showing how Jesus is actually the Good Shepherd, while the others are the bad ones. Right? So it seems like he's talking to 2 different people. Those who came before me, thieves and bandits, and then he also mentioned about hired caretakers. So some people tend to put a distinction between who the bandits or the thieves are, or the robbers, and who the hired ones are. But, it's it's not very clear in this passage whether John was talking about two different kinds of people. But whether they are the same or different, I think the main point of John, or Jesus, in saying this is that he's the good shepherd while the others are not. So it's just Jesus versus the others, the bad shepherds. So what makes Jesus a good shepherd? What makes Jesus different from others that people have experienced being under, right? And let's see why this passage is also relevant in our time today. So the term shepherd is a very important metaphor in the Bible. You know, the Bible uses a lot of metaphors, and the thing about metaphors is that it expands the meaning because the writer uses another object to describe something else. Right? For example, in the family or in the Filipino household, what do you call mother? He's the light of the household, right? And who is the father? He's the pillar or the foundation or something like that, right? So and sometimes we use even the body, right? We describe the father as the head of the family, while the mother is the neck that turns the head, right? So in the Bible also, they use these different figures of speech to describe something, right? But it adds, the beauty of using metaphors is that it expands the meaning. It makes the concept, the idea, very universal and timeless. Because when you discover the meaning of the metaphor, there's an experience of illumination or enlightenment, right? So the term metaphor it's a very common thing in the scripture because God was also described even in the book of Genesis, chapter 48. God was described as the shepherd of his people. He's the one who takes care of them. And sometimes also the leaders of the people, the Israelites, right? David and all their kings, they were also described as shepherds of the people. And Israel, on the other hand, is described as God's flock, right? So when Israel rebels against God, especially their leaders, their shepherds, they are punished and they are scattered like sheep. And it's very common in that context, in that particular context, because they live in a very agricultural context, right, in the ancient times. So this idea, this picture of shepherd taking care of the flock, and once this shepherd fails to do his duties and responsibilities, the flock becomes miserable. They suffer terribly, right? So for the readers or the people listening to this message, it's very clear for them what the meaning of the metaphor is. Right? But for some people who are not used to or haven't experienced taking care of sheep or whatever, the metaphor can be a little absurd, right? So there's a yes and there's a no in using metaphors. So you need to understand the context, right? When the writer is using this. Like for example, in Ezekiel chapter 34, right? And this is one of my, I think favorite passages in the Bible when shepherd is mentioned. Not just Psalm 23, but actually even in the prophets. The prophets would describe Israel's leaders as they're bad shepherds. Like here in Ezekiel chapter 34, it is Yahweh or God who is speaking, and he's telling the people, you shepherds, he's talking about the leaders of the people. Listen to what I, the Lord, are telling you. The Lord, am telling you. As surely as I am the living God, you had better listen to me. My sheep have been attacked by wild animals that killed and ate them because there was no shepherd. My shepherds did not try to find the sheep. They were taking care of themselves and not the sheep. So listen to me, you shepherds. I, the sovereign Lord, declare that I am your enemy. I will take my sheep from you and never again let you be their shepherds. Never again will I let you take care only of yourselves. I will rescue my sheep from you and not let you eat them. It's a very graphic picture of how the leaders of Israel at the time of Ezekiel, when he was writing this, right? That the shepherds who are supposed to be taking care of the sheep are the ones eating the sheep or abusing the sheep, right? And killing them. That's why God is telling them, you are a failure, in terms of performing your duties and responsibilities. So therefore, this is what God is doing. He will assign another shepherd, and he will take the sheep from the leaders or from the kings of Israel. So, and he's using another leader like, Cyrus or, some kings of, foreign kingdom to take care of the sheep. And it's interesting how also God uses another metaphor here, pointing to himself as the enemy of these, evil or wicked shepherds. So, what did God say in Ezekiel chapter 34? I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep, and I will find them a place to rest. I, the sovereign Lord, have spoken. I will look for those that are lost, bring back those that wander off, bandage those that are hurt, and heal those that are sick. But those that are fat and strong I will destroy, because I am a shepherd who does what is right. So, excuse me for that word fat there. So it's not talking about, the figure of people, right? But the fat there is about, people who have fattened themselves because of how they abuse the sheep. They have devoured, they have eaten, the sheep. And, they ravaged them, right? So they feasted on these sheep. So that's how God would describe them. That's why they became fat, or, they become bloated. So when Jesus saw the people of his time, going to the New Testament, you will see how these words from the prophet Ezekiel was fulfilled in the life of Christ. Like in Mark chapter 6, verse 34, when Jesus got out of the boat, he saw this large crowd, and his heart was filled with pity for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. So what's happening here in Mark chapter 6 is that John the Baptist was already arrested, and then he was executed, he was beheaded, right? So the people now are looking for another leader after John. And this is now the time that Jesus took over. He continued the ministry of ministering to these people. That's why people are, coming towards Jesus, clamoring after him, and they wanted to make him their new leader now, because John has already been executed. Right? So when Jesus saw the crowd, he felt pity, he felt compassion, because they were sheep without a shepherd. Right? And in Matthew chapter 25, this is what we see. Once Jesus returns, on the second coming, so this is how Jesus describes his coming. When the Son of Man comes as king and all the angels with him, he will sit on his royal throne, and the people of all the nations will be gathered before him. Then he will divide them into two groups, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the righteous people at his right and the others at his left. So again, this metaphor of the shepherd as separating, segregating, who really belongs to the kingdom and who does not, right? So this is how the writers of the Bible is trying to show Jesus as the fulfillment of the expectations of the Old Testament prophets, right? So apparently, in John chapter 10, the writer portrays Jesus as the fulfillment of these prophecies in the Old Testament, the hope of Israel and their expectation of the coming of the Messiah, who will shepherd God's people. So how did Jesus fulfill this role as the good shepherd? In other words, what kind of shepherd Jesus is, right? So the first thing we see in John chapter 10 is that he is the shepherd who cares for the sheep, right? So, nagmadali ulit yung clicker. So he is the shepherd that cares for the sheep, right? That's the first thing in verses 11 to 13. I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, right? And look at verse 13. The hired hand runs away because a hard hand does not care for the sheep. So this is what makes Jesus different compared to others, is that he is the shepherd who is willing to lay down his life for the sheep. And why is he doing that? Because he loves them and he cares for them. How did Jesus demonstrate his care for the sheep? By laying down his life for them. It's interesting how the Greek word that was used here is that this phrase, laying down of his life, it was mentioned 5 times in this passage. In verse 11, 15, 17, and 18. This act of laying down is something like when you are serving a plate, right? Like for example, when you are having a buffet or something, and you're holding a plate or, like a dish or, food, and then you're going to lay that down on the table, right? So that's the act of laying down, right? And it's also the same word that is used for sacrificing animals on the altar. When you sacrifice animals on the altar, you lay it down on the altar. Right? So it seems like Jesus here was talking about how he would sacrifice his life for the sheep, how he would offer his life for the sheep. But why would he do that? Why would the shepherd lay down his life for the sheep? Why would the shepherd give up his own life for the sheep? Because for the shepherd, he prioritizes the life and well-being of the sheep more than his own. For him, his life is less important compared to the life of the sheep. And he's doing it to save the sheep. To lay down his life means he is also the lamb that will be sacrificed to save the sheep. So in contrast to the hired caretakers, the wicked shepherds who doesn't care for the sheep in verses 12 to 13, these are the bad shepherds who will run away from danger because they see their lives as more important than the sheep. So when the shepherds see a danger, a threat to the sheep, so they will think about themselves. And it's interesting because the threat here is that the animals will be coming after the sheep, not the hired servants, right? So, have you seen a person running away, even if the threat is not against him, right? So that's how, stupid or dumb these hired servants are, right? So the animals are after the sheep. It's not after them, but they're the ones who are running away. Because for them, it's not worth risking their life for the sheep because they think of themselves as more important. Right? They are so selfish. Right? So because the bad shepherd, another thing why the bad shepherd would do that, because he doesn't own the sheep. He doesn't care whether the sheep is eaten by animals because it doesn't belong to him. Nothing will be lost from him. It's not his loss whether a sheep dies or not. Right? So they do not have relationship. In other words, these hired servants, they don't have connection with the sheep. They don't feel guilty or sorry about losing the sheep because they don't care. They don't mind the sheep. Therefore, it's easier for them to run away and leave the sheep when there's danger. Sadly, the bad shepherd doesn't care. Even if they are eaten by wild animals. In other words, being taken care of by hired servants, by wicked shepherds, it's very detrimental for the sheep. It is the most fatal situation for the sheep to be under the care of a bad shepherd. Right? So if you feel like you can just imagine your sheep and then you see a hired servant, that you are doomed. When somebody is coming and that this person is not concerned about you or doesn't care about you. So yeah, it seems like that's the kind of picture, right? That the most tragic moment in the life of the sheep is to be under the care of a useless and bad shepherd who doesn't care for them. Right? And Jesus was telling his listeners, you were once under bad shepherds, but now the true shepherd is here. Unfortunately, not many people will recognize a bad shepherd from the good shepherd. Right? Sometimes people will still follow a bad shepherd. Right? Because they don't have a choice. Right? For example, if the owner of the sheep would hire someone to take care of his sheep, the sheep doesn't have a decision, right? They cannot say that, oh, I don't like that shepherd, or we don't like that person to take care of us. But sometimes because sheep are dumb, they just follow. Right? And it happens too. In every community or group of people. Sometimes, it's the bad shepherd, it's the bad people who are given the responsibility. Right? But instead of taking care of the sheep, they take care of themselves. Right? So, and that's what makes Jesus different. Because for Jesus, the life of the sheep is more important than his own. Right? Therefore, he's the good shepherd because he cares, and his care for the sheep is genuine. Because his care for the sheep is not for his own good, actually. He's caring for the sheep for the welfare and the well-being of the sheep. Right? So it's interesting when I've experienced, visiting the Holy Land and we get to talk to an actual shepherd right there. So, and we are Asians, right? So when we come there and we saw these pictures of sheep lying around, so one of our companions asked the shepherd, so how much do you sell them? How much do you get from selling them? And how do they taste? Something like that, when you kill your own sheep. And then the shepherd doesn't want to answer. He said that, no, I don't want to answer those questions because I love my sheep and they're like family to me. It's interesting how he answers those kinds of questions. And I think this is also how Jesus would show himself to the sheep, is that he's the one who really genuinely loves the sheep, not because he's getting anything from them, but because he loves them and he treats them as his own. Right? And another thing about this is that, as I mentioned, this kind of shepherd has connection with the sheep. So in verse 14 and 15, you see, I am the good shepherd, I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. What's the word that is being repeated here? The word know, right? And the word know here implies a close, intimate relationship or connection with the shepherd. In the Bible, when this word know is mentioned, especially in the Old Testament, it is also sometimes used as a metaphor for an intimate relationship between two people. Like for example, in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, it says that Adam knew his wife Eve, and Eve conceived. And if you're, really looking at that verse, literally, you will be interested, you might ask the question, how come Eve conceived when Adam just knew her, right? So have you known a person and then the following day, that person already conceived, right? So of course, the knowing there, it implies something that is more intimate, very close relationship, right? So to know someone intimately means you know their character, you understand their whole being, how they behave, how they make decisions, what their will is. If you really know someone, even without speaking or without uttering words, you know what their intentions are, right? Like even in our context, like in marriage, and so tomorrow we'll be celebrating our 18 years of marriage. So trust me, I already know something about relationship, right? If you really know a person, and you ask something and then your wife says, it's up to you, that's a trap, right? So, when you really know someone, you become, like fortune tellers, you become mind readers now, right? So, and it seems like this is the kind of knowledge that Jesus is also showing his disciples, that, he knows the sheep, and as he knows the Father, it means that he knows how the sheep thinks, he knows how the sheep reacts, he knows how the Father also, what the Father's will is for the life of the sheep. So whatever the shepherd is doing, he's actually doing it in obedience to the will of the Father, because he's doing it in the context of that kind of relationship with the Father and relationship with the sheep, right? So the same way, the sheep listens to the voice of the shepherd. That is how the relationship is shown here. By hearing the voice and following the voice and obeying that. Right? The good shepherd in this story or in this gospel is the one who cultivates and nourishes this relationship through his connection and obedience to the Father. That's what we can see in verse 17. And another thing that we notice here is that this connection with the Father is grounded on love and compassion. It's not just about, there are many different kinds of relationship. There are, user-friendly relationship that just because they benefit from one another, right? So there are also business relationships, right? But if you look at the relationship that Jesus is describing here, it's more like a family relationship, it's a person-to-person relationship, right? That whenever you hear the voice, of that person that you already understand what he or she means, right? You also recognize this from the tone of voice, from the intonation of voice, right? So the voice here is also a very profound figure of speech that Jesus is using, is that you experience the care of the shepherd when you hear his voice. And today, how do we hear the voice of Jesus? How can we listen and obey and follow his voice? We say through reading the scripture, or through the Holy Spirit who speaks to us, or through our brothers and sisters who gives us good advice. That's how we hear the voice of Jesus now, right? So, and for us, in order for us to understand that voice of Jesus speaking to us, we have to be sure that we really have a relationship with him, that we really know him, and we have an intimate relationship connection with him, right? That we can understand and follow his voice. And then thirdly, that we see here is that this kind of shepherd he doesn't just have care for the sheep or cultivates relationship, but he also has compassion for the lost sheep. Right? In verse 16, you see here, I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. In other words, the lost sheep. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. So some people would tend to focus on that last phrase on verse 17 that says that I lay down my life in order to take it up again. But I think the meaning there is clear, that when Jesus offers his life, He has the power to give up his life, and at the same time, he has the power to take it back again, in reference to his resurrection, right? But the emphasis here again, the emphasis in this passage here again is, why did Jesus do that? Or why did he offer his life? And of course, he resurrected, right? He rose again. So he did that in obedience to the Father, and in order to bring the lost sheep. That is the point, right? It's not just about Jesus dying on the cross and rising again. But the point here is that he did that in order to bring in, the lost sheep. So the final picture of the shepherd here is that he is searching for this other sheep who will listen to him. And that is the point of what he did. He laid down his life so that the lost sheep will find a home. So what happens to the sheep when they are lost and without a shepherd? Basically, they will die. Right? In the Bible, the sheep is described as the most simple and vulnerable animal. It is often described as meek, humble, and dumb animals because they cannot survive without a shepherd. They cannot survive without a leader. Like for example, they like watching, documentaries or Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, things like that, right? So I tend to like watching those kinds of shows on TV, right? But if you observe, there are wild dogs, wild lions, wild goats, wild chickens, wild people, but you don't see wild sheep, right? You don't see a sheep running out in the wild without a shepherd taking care of them, because they won't survive. They won't survive because they are very vulnerable creatures. And I think that is also one of the things that is being portrayed, what the Bible is being portrayed about the sheep, is that they are so vulnerable. They don't have any ways to defend themselves. They don't have, of course the males have horns, but mainly they just use it for aesthetic or cosmetics, right? No, but even though they have those kinds of, features in their body, but they really cannot use that to defend themselves. And sometimes the sheep, according to some books, right, about taking care of sheep, their wool or their coat, it doesn't stop growing, right? So the more they eat, the more their wool would just grow and grow, and sometimes it also kills them. Can you imagine an animal or a creature that that is killed by his own skin? And that's how vulnerable sheep are. If no one is taking care of them, they will just, literally die. And I think that's how human beings are also showed in the scripture, is that without the shepherd, without someone really taking care of us, we cannot survive in the wild. We cannot survive in the world. So Jesus, being the good shepherd, he's the one who also would like to find those lost sheep, because he knows that those sheep will not survive living in the wild. As the good shepherd, he's concerned to the sheep who are outside his flock, and he wanted them to hear his voice so that they can be under his care. So therefore, Jesus is the good shepherd who gathers the sheep rather than scatters them. He embraces them all, especially the young and the vulnerable and the weak. Jesus wants his flock to be united under one shepherd. That's another thing we can also observe from this passage. He wants his sheep to find their home to the real shepherd so that they can become one flock. So the church, as being pictured also as the flock of Jesus, and our existence as a church, our life as a church is highly dependent on the shepherd who offered his life for us. And this shepherd wants to have a close relationship with him so that he can protect us when we listen to his voice. That's how the shepherds are protecting the sheep, by giving them orders, by giving them commands, by calling them by name. That is his way of protection. By letting the sheep know that, the voice of the shepherd that guides them, that leads them to their home. So what then should the church do in response? The response from the church should be to acknowledge our need for a shepherd. According to Kailan Day, we are sheep because we are in desperate need of a shepherd. It requires a certain level of humility for us to acknowledge that we need a shepherd, that our lives will be miserable. We will die on our own, right? We need a shepherd who will take care of us and give us his voice for us to follow, for us to obey, for us to listen to, so that we will be protected. We need a shepherd who cares for us. We need a shepherd who knows the mind of the Father. And if this shepherd knows the mind of the Father, he knows the perfect will, what is the best for us. So therefore, when we hear his voice, we should listen. We need a shepherd who has compassion for the lost, who looks after even those lost ones. He's not happy with the sheep dying or getting lost, right? But he wants all of them to find their home in him. On the other hand, this text is also telling us to stay away from bad shepherds. These shepherds seek to harm the sheep because they don't care for the sheep. These kinds of shepherds can mask themselves as shepherds, but in reality, all they care about is their personal interests and agendas. These shepherds will not hesitate to speak lies in order to deceive the sheep. Therefore, the sheep should listen carefully to the voice of the real shepherd. Right? And this is what this passage is telling us. Stay away from those wicked and evil shepherds. So who are the bad shepherds in our time? I hope it's not me. I hope it's not the pastor or whoever. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a person or a personality or people. Right? It could be anything that people put their trust on. The same thing that we experience our good shepherd by hearing his voice, we can also experience the bad shepherd by listening to bad advice from people. Listening to bad instructions, bad directions, bad influence. Right? The bad shepherds could be anything that takes away the will of God from our mind. The bad shepherds are the ideologies that people follow, that are dangerous for them. That the ideologies and thinking that damages and harms people rather than gives them life. Those are the bad shepherds that we also need to stay away from. So again, as we end, the real shepherd cares for the sheep and is willing to sacrifice his own life for them. The real shepherd cultivates good relationships within the flock by giving them his voice. And it requires for the flock to follow the shepherd, the voice of the shepherd. Relationship requires obedience, in other words. The real shepherd has compassion for the lost and seeks them out. And Jesus, interestingly, is also calling his disciples to become shepherds themselves. We as a church, we also have the responsibility to be good shepherds. Just like the time when Peter was called by Jesus and when he was recommissioned. It's in John chapter 21, not John chapter 10. Okay. So in John chapter 21, he said to him third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. After this, he said to him, follow me. Peter here is being the representative of the church, the disciples. Right? And it seems like Jesus is reminding him that the main motivation for him to fulfill his duty as the shepherd of the sheep is to love the Lord. Love the good shepherd, or the chief shepherd, as what he's written in one of his letters. Right? And Jesus is also giving this mandate to the church, that we need to seek out and feed the sheep, take care of one another. So as members of the flock of Christ, we should manifest the character of our shepherd. We need to become people who are caring, people who cultivate strong and harmonious relationships with one another. And we should have compassion for the lost, just like our good shepherd. Let us pray. Shepherd of all, by laying down your life for your flock, you reveal your love for all. Lead us away from the place of death to the place of abundant life, that guided by your care for us, we may rightly offer our lives in love for you and our neighbors. Amen. Shall I call on the worship team?